I'm Barry, list of Informs. Thank you all very much for joining us. Last year, we were in Boston, and Julia Kirby of Harvard Business Review very kindly agreed to lead a panel discussion with folks like Brian Eck of Google and Diane Cope of Disney. And we moved it to the other coast this year, and thankfully she agreed to reprise this panel again. The topic is how to build a top performance analytics team and organization. And Julia, thank you again.
Thank you. Barry, of course, it wasn't very hard to get somebody who's lived through the Boston winter to come out to Surf City. So this was not a very hard yes to say. I'm going to give some very quick introductions, not so much introductions as just putting names with faces, because I always feel like it's the better compliment to experts to give them the airtime rather than spend time praising their past accomplishments. But you all have the app, and you can check out their bios in full. So right next to me is Lisa Kart from Gartner. She's the research director covering advanced analytics and big data, and she's an analytics person herself. So she's one of those great analysts who's actually been in the trenches herself. Next to her is Michelle Davis. She's director of analytics at FICO, where they know something about analytics. It's kind of an all analytics all the time kind of place. And she's also the chair of the analytics board of directors within the organization. Then we have Brenda Dietrich, an IBM fellow, and also vice president in the IBM Watson group. She leads the emerging technologies team there, which extends and applies Watson's cognitive computing technology. She was also head of the math sciences function in IBM Research, and she's also, by the way, former president of Informs. Next to her is Zahir Balaporia, director of process and technology at Schneider, and specifically in the intermodal business. Earlier, he led the corporate decision engineering team, the group doing the advanced analytics for the whole organization. And finally, Bill Climack from now Chevron, decision analyst at Chevron for the past few years. But the bulk of his career is in the US Army. And during that illustrious career, I'm just going to hit two highlights. He was Army basic training battalion commander, and also chief of staff of the UN peacekeeping operation in Haiti. So this is a great group of people to talk about, to do what this session is supposed to do, which is kind of take us up a level in the organization. Instead of talking about specific solutions, which so many of these sessions are about the super clever analytics solutions, to instead talk about what does it take to build the capability to do those on a routine basis and even make them, you know, a core to the competitive advantage of an organization. So over the next half an hour, we're going to have a conversation about hiring, talent, trends in the talent market, leading the function, where it should be organizationally situated, kind of all these perennial issues that go into building a world-class analytics team. Then at the end, of course, we'll have time for everybody else's questions. So let's just get started. I'm going to just cold call in that great Harvard tradition. We're going to start, I guess, with this question of hiring and building the team. Let's, I guess, start with hiring itself and trends in that. I mean, I guess, why don't I start with you, Zahir, and just tell me what is difficult about hiring right now?
Well, I think most of us are facing this in some way, shape, or form. The market is hot. There's a lot of talk about a talent gap and getting, you know, can you get the right people? What are the skills? And so there's a lot of conversations about that going on. Us personally, we're headquartered in Green Bay, Wisconsin, so there's a bit of a location disadvantage sometimes, unless you're a huge Packer fan, then it's easy. So we have sort of different challenges, but in general, though, what I've found is where I've had sort of the most success is in trying to get people to connect with the organization, kind of what the work will be like. And if you can identify with that, then some of these other factors like location and things like that tend to be less of an issue, especially for this kind of work. I think more and more people are passionate about the work and how am I going to be able to make an impact. So if I can, make that connection, but otherwise, those are some of the sort of the general challenges from a hiring standpoint.
Brenda, you must have so many people knocking on your door and wanting to work for you, but is there anything that you're finding it really hard to fill the positions on?
One of the things I struggle with is, especially with the younger set of people we're hiring, is impatience. Wanting things done now, thinking the elapsed time from idea to full deployment in a huge company should be a few weeks, right? And that's really just not realistic. So we try to find people who have a little bit more maturity in terms of understanding that going from idea to student code that ran for 3 data sets to something that's going to run every day to run a business process actually takes some time. And it takes a lot of software engineering and testing and appreciation of your colleagues and the rest of the business. So I tend to look for that. Not necessarily the people with the single bright idea and the passion to take it forward, because I also need the practicality.
I mean, I would love to hear how you find that in a candidate. Like, what is it that you ask to see that you're one of the ones who is past immediate gratification stage?
Right. You have to sort of tease it out of them by asking about life's experiences, what makes them happy, how long do they think something would be to take, and you try to sense what their level of frustration and tolerance for frustration is. And these are not quantitative skills. This has nothing to do with tools, but this has to do with whether they're going to be successful and happy in a role in a large company that would like to move faster, but sometimes still has a lot of things we have to get through to make it right.
So you already moved us into the territory of what the talent wants. Mm-hmm. There's sort of what you want and what you're looking for, but this is this sort of super hot talent pool right now that can kind of set their terms. Do you see, and this is wide open to anyone, but what are they asking for today that they weren't asking for maybe 5 years ago?
Well, I think it starts really with bringing them in from the job description itself, right? That's the first tie-in to the candidate. That's what's bringing them to apply to that position. And so the job description really completes 2 different purposes. One of them really focuses on what type of data scientist that you're looking for, because data scientist is such a huge term right now. We can't just say that we want a data scientist. We have to be much more prescriptive in how we describe the position that we're looking to fill. But it's also a grab in order to get them interested in the company. And that's something that has changed quite a bit in our hiring practices, is what is going to interest them about our position, about our company, and making sure that that job description meets both needs.
Lisa, you advise so many companies, and you kind of get this great panoptic view of what's going on. What do you hear from people?
A lot of organizations come to us, ask about how they can find data scientists, how they can hire data scientists, what kind of job description should they have. And we talk about the skills, and I think the skills are a really wide set of skills, and that to build an advanced analytics team, you're not just looking for those quantitative skills. You're looking for the data management skills, leverage new data sources. You're looking for some domain expertise oftentimes. You're looking for communication skills. You're looking for curiosity. But that, again, you always hear it referred to as the unicorn data scientist, because very few people have all of those skills. So what you need to do is you need to make sure you're covering those skills in a team of people. So
does that mean that you're looking for specialists and that you're going to achieve what you need from the portfolio, or are you really trying to look for utility players and then deploy them in different ways?
I think it depends in part on how large of an organization you're going to have and how many aspects of the enterprise you're trying to influence. If you're just starting and it's a small organization, I think the first few hires are absolutely critical. and that they need to be people with breadth and ability to appreciate all the different dimensions of analytics. Not someone who is, forgive me, an optimization bigot and sees everything as an optimization problem. I'm an optimization bigot. But not someone who only thinks about machine learning either. You need someone who has broad appreciation of the portfolio of tools we bring, and also I think a fair amount of appreciation of the larger software development and management process. Right? If you're already a big organization and you're fitting people in, you look for the areas where you can get good synergies, where you're filling a gap. Or maybe someone who's very strong in a certain area, but you have the ability to mentor and grow them into other areas. So I think it depends on the size and the positioning of the data analytics group that you need to be focused on.
I think there's a really good point in there, which is that, and all of the people here at this conference are more mature on the analytics curve. And in general, the organizations we talk to are much less mature, right? They're coming from a background of BI and reporting and maybe data visualization, and they're trying to take that first step to advanced analytics. And so when, I think people immediately assume they have to build a team internally, and I think a lot of organizations can get started by leveraging software and services from providers to get started and kind of prove the value in their organization. I think also that when people are looking at the hiring skills, they may already have skills in different parts of their organizations. I don't know how many times I introduce one part of our organization to another part who knows how to do optimization or predictive analytics. So I think you also have to look internally for skills.
The comment you were making earlier about unicorns, so you probably aren't going to be able to find a unicorn, so you probably have to create your unicorn. So let's talk a little bit about development. Is there anything, something you do in your organization that helps grow the talent that you have?
I think it's really easy to come in specialized. As if you want somebody that is focused in optimization, if you feel like that's where your gap is, it's very easy to fill that position if they have the right communication and other skills as well. What is problematic is if they stay overly specialized. They would pigeonhole themselves into that position going forward. And as we know, the data scientist position is forever changing. And so really to make sure that your employees are gaining exposure to other projects, other areas of the business, other analytics within the company is such a valuable way to go about developing your employees.
I try to get them as close to the front line as possible. So at the risk of bragging a little bit, I think I hold the record for getting the most number of technical folks in a truck with a driver at Schneider. And I don't know what it is about organizational culture or structure. I spent many years prior to moving into the intermodal line of business as part of our corporate OR team, and nobody said I couldn't do it, but I just never did for whatever reason. And then after moving into closer to so within the line of business function and closer to the problems, there is no substitute for actually seeing at that point of where a lot of your solutions are making an impact. Most of my work is in the dispatch space, so that's that happens as an office function as well. But at the end of the day, there's nothing more powerful than a driver telling me, this is why your optimization is bad, to use other words sometimes, and this is why your optimization works well. And nothing motivates me more than hearing that. And I think that's usually the same for a lot of other people working in this kind of space. I try to get our OR folks or our IT folks close to that experience so they get a feel for, this is the stuff I did and here's how it's making a difference, good or bad. And that I think really motivates people to kind of then figure out what's next. And that I think is an important part of growth. Right? There's all the technical stuff and we can do all that, but sometimes I think we miss that portion of the growth so that we can then get to better and more implementable solutions.
And I would add that you probably want on your staff people who get their sense of satisfaction over helping your drivers or your dispatchers do a better job, as opposed to someone who's happy when the slide presentation is done or the paper is sent off to a journal.
I tend to do more of the sort of the non-technical portions of the interviews for new candidates, And that's a specific question I asked them. I said, I want you out there, I want you in a truck, I want you sitting with our dispatchers. How do you feel about that? So kind of teasing that information out. And if I kind of get a lukewarmish kind of, sure, I'll do that if you want me to, versus you kind of see that spark, like, yeah, that's what I really want, you know. And it may have been somebody who's been working somewhere else who just was craving for that but never got that opportunity. Or if it's somebody more fresh out of school, I just wanted to kind of, again, try to gauge, is that really how they're wired, or they may be wired a different way? And then there's plenty of other jobs if they're wired differently that I think they'd be happier in.
And Chevron's obviously a really big company, so there isn't one solution in any particular business unit necessarily, but having joined Chevron after being a consultant and being a professor, it was interesting just to look at how what they had evolved to. And vibrant, very social company, so many people doing analytics came out of other fields, or scientists, engineers, and because they recognized the need as they matured within their professional areas and saw the need for that. And then in hiring, there's a choice to be made. So do you want somebody that understands the business or somebody that's an analytics expert? So it's really a blend, and what organization are they going to go into? But one of the things that really struck me when you join a project team, I think in any oil and gas, and I've consulted at other companies, it's not unusual during a meeting, somebody could be a multi-decade veteran and they'll stop the meeting and say, wait, what's that acronym? I'm not sure what that is. Because so many different viewpoints, both from the business world, engineering, geology, geophysics come into play to try to understand what's available and then how to gain the information and see the value of the information and process it. So I think it's really a mix of those things, but you want the right blend of bringing someone in that knows the techniques really well, but then they have to apply it within the right context where it's not useful.
Let's move on to this perennial question of organizational structure, where the function is situated in the organization. I'm going to just make you keep talking for a little while, Bill, because Chevron's so sprawling and probably does it all kinds of ways. But I guess the first question I have is, why is it that some companies have it centralized and some have it decentralized? Is this a maturity thing as well, or are there good reasons that one would have it one way and one the other?
Well, I think there's clearly advantages and disadvantages to anything. There's no magic solution. I'm sure anybody in the audience, can think of good or bad things. However, they've seen it organized in their companies or companies that they've worked with. So it's a blend of things really in Chevron, depending where you are. And so of all the quantitative reasoning areas within Chevron, by far the most mature is the decision analysis field. And so there are centralized teams that provide services, but each BU also has their own set of decision analysts that work there. But the community is just, again, Chevron's a very social company, and there are bodies that meet, discuss, okay, how do we develop people, what do we need to do, and talk across the enterprise of how we need to do that. And it was really amazing that it evolved that way through the efforts of some people that had a vision and saw it implemented and then got buy-in, demonstrated that it was worthwhile, and then got buy-in. So that's the most mature group, but you think of any area in analytics, even text recognition, I'm surprised that there are people, pushing that forward. And we have a lot of well charts that are still on paper. So it's kind of like the medical field, charting, how do you gain access to that information?
I think at our organization, we've tried it a variety of different ways. I've been at Schneider 18 years, and in some areas we have what we call embedded groups. So my role, actually, as of Friday, I'm rotating out of my intermodal assignment and moving into a more corporate role. So now I'll be Director of Advanced Planning and Decision Sciences. So my team will actually end up supporting the person who's going to be backfilling me in the intermodal space where I've been working over the last 5 years. So I'll have the opportunity, we should catch up again in a year or so, to kind of see from the other side, but I used to be on the other side in the past. My firm belief is you got to get the folks as close to the work as possible. Our structure today is our embedded teams report into a central group. So I used to report into our intermodal operations group. As of even last year, I now report into a central group, but I'm still sort of dedicated to that division. So we have that model in a few of our divisions, and the other divisions tend to have something like that, maybe smaller, but then tend to go to the central group for more things, for more of their projects. So it's really seems to be a blend. I mean, we all have our preferences and things. At the end of the day, I think you don't start with a structure, you start with a problem, right? What problem are we trying to solve? And then rally around the problem and try to solve it. Structure is critical. I think structure drives behavior, so I'm not minimizing that. But I think if you can rally around the problem, some of those other things, like you said, Bill, I mean, there's good and bad with every structure, so you can't always get the perfect structure. And there's nothing wrong with changing it over time, too. I used to be one of those, like, oh my God, here we go again. You know, we used to be this, now we're that. And actually, as I've grown up a little bit, I'm like, you know, that's okay, because it shows different things, and then maybe you go back. You don't change it every 6 months, but if you've given it enough of a shot, maybe it's time to kind of change it a little bit, just to shake things up a little.
Lisa, you've looked at, again, you have this meta-awareness, and you've specifically looked at this question. So what?
Yeah,
is there
it
a
was
trend?
interesting. We recently did a study as part of some of our advanced analytics research, and we surveyed over 600 advanced analytics practitioners. So this is predictive and prescriptive analytics. And we asked them where their teams reported up to, and I was surprised actually that it was as high as a quarter reported up to the CIO or IT. But that means that 75% are reporting to various lines of business, right? So the big ones are chief marketing officer, the chief data officer, areas like strategy and planning, CFO, even the CEO or COO. And then you get into some very specific industry roles like chief risk officer or head of development or head of engineering or head of product. So it's all over the place. And when we look, you know, we see all the different organizational models out there you can imagine. I think that it's typical to see organizations, you know, that are now becoming aware of analytics start to say, hey, you know, should we build a centralized team either in IT or outside of IT? And then they realize that there are, you know, dispersed teams that are, you know, in marketing or in finance or wherever. And so I think there's really this balance, just to reflect what Zahir and Bill has said, is there's a balance between, there are advantages to centralizing because you can share tools and methodology and best practices and scale, but you want to make sure you're not losing that intimacy with the business, right? So it sounds like you guys both have sort of these hybrid models, which try to address both sides of that.
So let's, yeah,
I'm sorry,
go
I
ahead,
would just
please.
follow on that if you are decentralized and if you do have those hooks into the product and where the analytic is needed, I would still really focus on developing analytic days, communities, and foster that discussion. So you're sharing projects and you're taking advantage of what else is being done in the company, having that communication and that path open to other analytic teams. And so your value.
Another reason to keep the connection if you've got distributed analytics teams is just career growth of individuals. Because if you're completely distributed, they're going to almost by definition be small groups with each function. And for people who want to chart their career advances, there's not a lot of places to go, right? If you're staying within that line of business, within that 4-person analytics group. If you have some degree of connectivity between them, there's at least lateral movement around to gain more experience and understanding of other businesses. And if you've got some sort of coordinating entity, we use within IBM centers of excellence, which coordinate across things that might be distributed. That also gives you, again, a little bit of a career path upward.
It's
and
an extremely good point. And so I have to wonder, the talent that you're interviewing, do they care about the structure? Do they ask about that? Because it seems like from what you're saying, they should.
They do ask. They do ask, what is a career like in this field? Right? Am I always going to be moved project to project to project to project? Are there other places I can go out into other types of roles? Do I always have to be client-facing? Because it may involve a lot of travel, and there may be periods in your life when you don't want to travel extensively. And so one of the things that we've always tried to do in IBM with the community is to allow people to move between the different analytics functions when they need to. If someone's been an on-the-road consultant and can't travel for a few years, we try to find city-based jobs where they're not going to have to travel for a while.
So the reason, I guess, organization structure is so important to get right is because of this, the problem of the handoff. You've got this brilliant, clever solution cooked up, and then somehow it has to have an impact on the business in somebody else's hands. And I'm really curious if there's a best practice, or at least how do you do it to make that implementation smooth, so that there's some kind of a ownership to the right point by your group.
I point out, I think Chevron generates projects to put out new production facilities in the upstream and the exploration and production side of the business. And so base business is very important, but projects bring on new resources for us. And of course, the fields decline, so you continually have to do that. And so the project management tools that all the project managers see within Chevron have analytics tools embedded in them. They don't even know that hey, this is just how Chevron does it, and this is what's expected. As part of that too, the consumers of the decision support packages that look at the results, they were taught and educated all the way from the CEO when he agreed to embed these processes, how to read these things, so that when they look at various outputs, risk profiles, and everything, that they understand them. So it's expected that they understand them, and the teams know they're expected to deliver those products. So to take a very broad look at the impacts and uncertainties and the risks.
I mean, in some sense, the ultimate success is that there's some deep mathematical model embedded in something and nobody knows it's in there. They just use it every day, right? It's sometimes hard to get to that point.
Yes, somehow there's somebody who's responsible for baking it into those.
Yep.
At least you have to get that handoff right.
And I forget who mentioned this, is that so the longer you leave a model unattended, the more likely it is to be replaced with a spreadsheet. So I think Carl Kemp at Intel, I think, was the one I heard it from. I'm not sure if it came from somewhere else. But so it depends on the project, but in our case, dispatch optimization, I mean, that's a core decision we make thousands of times a day. That doesn't get handed off, right? So I used to be the guy that managed the engineers who developed it, deployed it, and then worked with folks within the intermodal business to take it forward. But adoption was spotty, and when we put pressure, adoption went up. When you looked somewhere else, adoption went down. And when I had the conversation with the vice president of operations as to what was going on, at the end of that conversation, he said, well, then you just got to have to come over and do it. That's why I went into the intermodal business, and it opened up my eyes to a whole world of other issues. And you really, I think, have to be it's more in the realm of systems thinking, systems engineering, than it is purely an optimization problem or whichever blend of advanced analytics it might be, because there are so many things that have to come together. And that's why even when we titled the group, we called it process and technology, because we keep saying, process and technology have to come together. Well, but then we never really title it that way, right? We talk about it, but then what are you doing about it? So my team in intermodal is responsible for the process and technology, but everything from design of what happens in the cab of the truck, what's the driver going to see, how are they going to update their ETAs, which then updates their next available time, and the next available time is a key input in the optimization problem. So if I don't have that right over 1,500 drivers, what's the point of the optimization problem running every 10 minutes? So you really have to take that full systems integrated view to that. So in our case, for dispatch optimization, we're not necessarily handing it off. There are portions of it that we can get other people to help with, but we have to be in the middle of it, at the core of it, and it's never perfect ever, right? There's always things you got to do, change, something changes somewhere, you got to keep it refreshed and updated. So that one, I think, will kind of live on with a fairly significant support investment and new things and capabilities that we add to it.
If I could hop in for a second, just Chevron's a big company, but we have a change leadership group just for uptake and consistent application for them. Obviously, we're big enough to invest in that, but they're behavioralists to get people to look at, okay, here's how do we get people to understand the value, see it, what are the negatives, and how do we have a shaping curve to take us to where we want to be. And it's a journey to get there, as you say, but we invested in a team just to do just that.
I think it's also very different if you're talking about implementation that's being done by humans or automated systems, right?
True.
So with humans, there's more of a challenge in getting adoption, getting buy-in, getting them to have some confidence and faith in this decision that, this black box analytics sometimes. But I think I agree with Brenda that the more invisible you can make it to business users sometimes, and the more that it's, rather than replacing them, it's enabling them to make better decisions, the more luck you'll have.
So if you lead the top performing, high performance analytics organization, I feel like there's one thing you have to do more than anything else, and that's raise the performance of the group. And that's what the organization demands of you, and that's what the people want from you. So, but that begs this question of how do you define performance? How do you measure it? What's the right way to think about performance measurement of a high-performing organization? What are you trying to move the needle on?
I go back to projects. I'm an engineer. I like to fix stuff. So I think from a value perspective, if I'm working on things that are meaningful to the organization, that's what gets me out of bed every morning. That's what I'm excited about, and when I actually move the needle on that, and then recognition comes with it in other shape or form, an award or maybe a promotion or something like that. But I keep going back to that core motivation of, what are we moving the needle on? There have been times in our history where, for whatever reason, 2009, Great Recession, all that stuff, it wasn't the most fun time to be at work and, be in an analytics organization because there were other pressures. The biggest thing was, there's so many problems we can fix. Why aren't they using us, right? So I think that if I can align the team around, guess what? This is the biggest, baddest problem there ever was, and nobody's been able to fix it. And guess what? We're going to be the ones to get after it, and we're going to do something about it. I think now you're sort of taking that, you're creating that pull rather than a push. You're pulling us towards really what is that next level of performance going to be, and then you can look back and say, wow, look at the problems we've solved. What's next? And that's sort of one of the things that I try to do to get sort of my team energized around something.
I really agree that we are trying to fix problems. If we spend a lot of time on developing our analytics and then they don't get adopted or implemented, that time was essentially wasted. Not in all cases, but in many of our cases. And I think that a team shows that they're in trouble when they don't have a lot of their solutions, or any of their solutions perhaps, being implemented. I think that they could have misaligned on a couple different things. It's either misalignment within the priority of the analytic that they're working on, or maybe they overcomplicated the solution and they didn't understand the downstream issues or constraints, and that really limited the adoption rate of their analytic. And I think that those both speak to really making sure that you're fixing that problem and making sure that it is effective and useful.
Yeah, I think we measure the impact of the things we have deployed or enabled to be deployed across the company. And I always go back to what I often saw my role in when I had a large math team in the research division, was making sure that IBM made the best possible use of its available resources. And so to do this, you have to understand how different resources are used in manufacturing and selling.
You are an optimization geek.
I am. I mean, that's really what it's all about for me. But it's what resources are used for what. Where's the decision point? Who decides what? What data do they have? What methods do they use? How do we know we're continually making better and better and better decisions over time?
Anyone, is there a metric that you just can't get, but you wish you could, because it would change everything for how you motivated the team or tracked performance? I mean, that impact one sounds like it to me, because it's often so hard to connect the dots to the ultimate impact.
But if you design the projects up front, understanding what it is you're trying to affect, all right? I'm trying to make each salesperson more effective. I'm trying to make sure we don't ever order parts we can't use because some other parts are missing, or whatever. That's what I'm trying to do. How am I going to measure it? If you have that mindset at the beginning,
Right.
What is it you're trying to fix? You can keep track of whatever that quantity is before, during, and in sustained use.
I see a lot of organizations really struggle with that, struggle with kind of what's the ROI on analytics. And Sometimes they decide that they can't measure it, but they're going to do it anyways, right? Because they believe in it somehow, and they know they need to do it, and they know that it's going to improve processes and things, and they can't quite get their hands around what that value is, but they know there's value, and they do it anyways.
I was going to go back to my previous life in the Army as a leader there, and just management by walking around and understanding what's really happening. And so for the human dimension, I think everybody, the job satisfaction, and we touched on certainly on that in some comments, that they're contributing and being recognized for that contribution, and particularly if it's not going to be adopted or used, well, okay, well, why is that? Because sometimes that happens, and maybe, hopefully, good for a good reason, hopefully, But certainly understanding what's really going on and what's happening, and wherever, like Zahir talking about the drivers and getting folks out seeing the drivers. I mean, that's just literally where the rubber meets the road, I guess, for you guys, right. And whatever that is in your business, and understanding that, because not everything gets summarized well when it gets rolled up. And on top of that, you can get good production for a while, but it's like the old joke that beatings will continue until morale improves. Eventually that morale factor has an impact. And so at Chevron, we're told all the time, it's not just getting good results, but getting it the right way. And that's on our annual forum, that you're expected to do a good job and do it the right way in terms of leadership and take care of your people.
No, that's great. So those are leadership behaviors, kind of classic great leadership training kind of concepts. So that's what I'd like to talk to the group about next, is just leadership. You're all leaders. You've all had to learn how to be that. What do you think is different about leading this kind of talent or this kind of organization that maybe wouldn't be a leadership behavior that would be so important? Or conversely, what are the worst mistakes you could do with this kind of a group of people?
Well, I think one dimension we have to work on as we're leading people in the analytics field is to help them acknowledge that most of the world doesn't think necessarily the way we think. They're less quantitative by nature. They may have difficulty dealing with uncertainties and probabilities. And you have to be careful using words like, coefficient and constraint and things like that with some people. And just learning how to really listen and really speak in a way that your message will get through and you'll have the impact, but you won't alienate the people who you need to be using your stuff.
There's a great story actually related to that. Is I worked with a company that did sales analytics, and they helped prioritize, for salespeople, what in their pipeline should they focus on, right? And there are a lot of analytics behind it, embedded, and they returned to them a probability of win for that deal. Well, they found out that the salespeople just didn't know what to do with that, and they instead had to change it, despite all the machine learning that drove it, to red, yellow, green, because that's what they could understand and act on.
Right.
And we earlier talked about, how do you bring in this great talent? They're creative, they're motivated, and they're ready to go. One thing I learned the hard way as a leader, because I came out of doing the work myself, was I had to let go, right? And I think that's the hardest part, at least personally. I found I got to a point where I was trying to do my job as a manager and a leader. At the same point in time, I was trying to solve complex, problems. And that's no. You need to know when to move on, and then trust your people, enable your people, and be able to step back and sometimes go in a path that you would not go down, but they're passionate about it and they believe in it. And you know what? Maybe I was wrong. So you got to let them go and just know when to step in. And again, no, I think you've gone too far. Every once in a while, you got to step in and go, stop. We're not going down that path. But there are enough times where I had to say, nope, I'm just going to let it go. And more often than not, it worked out great. And I learned through that process. We got better as a team. Even at one point in time, I used to do a lot of resource allocation. So I would get the project and I would say, I think Bill will be the best for this project. So I would go give the project to Bill. And then I found, I just wasn't able to get the throughput I wanted. And then eventually one day I just started.
You're saying I let you down?
No, it was my fault. One day I just started sending out the list of projects saying, hey, so-and-so came in. I did some initial vetting to say, yep, it's a good project. I think it'll be. But then I just send it out to the whole team and say, who wants this one? And suddenly capacity just came crawling out, right? So, oh, I'll take that one, I really want. And then my problem was, no, this is a really good one for Joe because I know that was part of his plan and what he wanted to develop. So sorry, Bill, you won't be able to work this one, but could you mentor Joe because this is in your sweet spot. Then my job became more that, then project manager and say who'll do this and who's got the hours. It just had to sort of let go a little bit and it just became so much better. And then the team, I think, appreciated it a lot more too.
I've really enjoyed listening to you. I think that you have great ways to engage your team, and you probably have a huge retention rate of your employees because you're pulling them forward with the ideas instead of pushing them. You're letting them speak out on those projects. You're exposing them to different types of projects that weren't in their wheelhouse, perhaps. I find that very motivating.
Just talking about coaching and mentoring just reminded me that, I think probably everybody has cases where somebody will come to you and say, look, we did the analysis, built the model, we believe it's credible, and then we did the analysis, and there's pushback or disagreement, and they're not listening to me. And some of that may be just, the individual needs to develop, or, maybe it's on the other side, whatever it might be. And I always have a conversation about, well, what is it we're trying to achieve here? And, just venting or whatever with them, so if you need to vent to me, that's okay, but that isn't helpful unless you think that's going to get you to where you want to be. So what behavior are you trying to achieve? And then what's the best way to encourage that behavior? And that's the leadership aspect. So think of that when you're trying to influence a project team to listen to your point if you think that they haven't adequately done that or they've misperceived something or whatever the issue is. So, those interpersonal skills are vital, especially in very complex things. And you have things in tension, right? There's always, they want it cheap and soon and, all those things, right?
Well, listen, I promised our colleagues in the room that they'd get their chance and I wouldn't monopolize the whole conversation here. So I guess, Barry, do we have a mic or do people just shout? Oh,
There's a mic.
There it is. Okay. Questions, anyone for this distinguished panel?
Hi, my name's Scott Davis from Alaska Airlines. And our group's going through kind of the beginning stages of that growth right now. So we currently have a localized kind of central OR group, and we're growing. We're curious to see which model works better from a training perspective. How do you get your people up to speed if they're embedded in the individual units versus if they're all localized? And then on the flip side, if they are all localized, how do you still get the engagement from the business units?
Anyone want to take that?
You've done both models. What do you think?
I would, first off, picking the problem maybe is not maybe what the question was, but I would start actually there is making sure you've got the problems well defined that you want to get after. Once you've got those, then I would sort of determine which direction to go. I'm biased towards, again, I've said it before, getting as close to the project as possible, getting as close to the front line. I think you get a lot more real data, a lot more, all the stuff that the database doesn't have, you'll get all that stuff, which greatly increases the likelihood of deployment and adoption, and also could greatly simplify what you build out. So it's almost this lean approach to developing stuff. So there's agile, lean methods for all kinds of stuff, but if you wanted to think about it that way, it's like small development, rapid deployment, iterative development. So I would lean towards get as close to the end users as possible, and then get your folks there. And once you've got some success doing that, then it might be time to kind of think about other models, structurally and things like that. That would be my thought process.
Okay, over here.
Thanks. This question is sort of about retention and about sort of the market for talent. And I'd be curious if you kind of think about the last time that you lost somebody that you really hated to lose. Why did you lose him or her?
I can't, obviously I don't lead a team, so I have a different perspective, but I can speak from my own experience and why I have left jobs. And I was just telling a story last night to someone, is that I was at a job that had really interesting problems. So that's one of the things that we talk about, right? They have really interesting problems, but the relevance of seeing the impact of it wasn't there. It was more theoretical. It was more, write up your result, and you weren't sure whatever happened to it and whether there were decisions being made. So I'd go back to, I think you have to understand what drives people, and not everyone is driven by having, seeing the impact of the result of their analytics and their efforts, but for me, that was a big one.
Brenda, lost anyone?
Yeah, we've lost some people. It's the impatience factor that I've been seeing lately. It's invented, it works, why can't we turn it into a product and sell it next week? And I understand the frustration. That's not the way big companies generally work. We hope to get to that model with DevOps and software as a service at some point, but when you're selling licensed software, there is a delay between the time the code first compiles cleanly and you stamp product on it and sell it. And that frustration, I think, is something that a lot of people fresh out of school haven't experienced yet. All right? And that's why we lost a few of them in the last couple of years.
Thanks.
I think that understanding what makes people tick, as Lisa was saying, is so critical in keeping them employed as part of your team or as part of the company, because we have a lot of valuable people that do want to continue their career path, and that might not be possible through the current team that they're on. But understanding how they tick and really engaging them and making sure that they are working on those interesting projects or they are getting that client interaction, and really targeting the message a little bit differently, a little tweaking for each employee really helps the retention.
Well, I don't know if this helps. It's not a Chevron answer because nobody's moved on since I've been there, and I don't claim credit for that. But in the military, I, like many professionals that have served over a career, they retire. They wind up typically working for about 3 companies in 5 to 8 years, and then kind of settle down and stay somewhere. And so I think part of that is they moved into a new environment. They're trying to find the best fit for them that's professionally rewarding. So part of that is all the normal things you think of, compensation and where and work environment. But a lot of it, I think, is job satisfaction just overall. So I take away from that just having conversations, and just kind of to your point, what is it that someone is really looking for? And as much as you can, whatever you have the ability to influence, provide the things that somebody's looking for satisfaction. So like, just Zahir's example, probably job satisfaction went up when people thought they had some more input on which projects they were going to work on, or at least understood, okay, I see why Joe got it. I'd like to put my hand up to work on this time series stuff next time, or whatever it might be. So that's what occurs to me. Maybe a slightly different answer than you're looking for, but hopefully that's at least a little helpful.
Hello, everybody. My question revolves around education. As we look for people to hire, there's obviously a need out there then to find degrees that align with what we're looking for. I'd just like to get your perspective on, we talked a little bit up here about on-the-job experience, but as far as degree programs and experience ahead of time, what things do you believe are necessary as far as either a degree program or specific skill sets that should be maybe within a degree program or degree programs that align with what your jobs entail? Because we deal with all the way from the data all the way to the statistics and analysis. So how do we handle that then from an educational perspective, given that that's so broad?
Well, one shortcoming I see with many of the, especially the operations research curriculums, including the one I went through a number of years ago, is not enough is taught about the data side, how to extract, how to filter, how to cleanse, how to write scripts to pump data from here to here to here. And so some exposure to that, and when I advise universities that are setting up master's degree programs in business analytics, that's something I always push on. They're not going to have those courses to probably pull from in their OR department or in the business school. They may need to get that from a computer science department, but they need to be graduating kids who know how to do that.
Similar thing, most university programs, right? You get homework assignments in the back of the text.
Yeah.
Well, here's the data table, and real life is it's very complex to get to the point where, okay, I'm satisfied my data is reasonably representative of the true problem and working through that piece. The other thing that strikes me, having been involved in the Informs, looking at analytics and the certification program, just looking at end-to-end process as opposed to the methodological area that tend to come out of the degree programs. So that's just something to look for if somebody has exposure, how to work an entire problem all the way from identifying what it really is to how to present the results and see it get implemented. So Chevron, we spend a lot of time just framing the problem and saying, are we answering the right question? Even among the professionals with a lot of experience, people tend to want to leap to a solution. People think they know the problem, and when you stop and take a step back, sometimes you can really recognize some nuggets that you wouldn't have seen. So it's not just people new in the field, but really framing the problem properly. So that's what strikes me.
I know the answer, you just need to build me a model that proves it.
Right. Or close, you're just tuning it.
Just
So,
close enough.
another thing, you could do it completely differently. So.
To speak to that a little bit more, I do think that internships are very valuable as you're going through academia to get that business exposure so you can figure out what the problem is. I find that people that are purely academia backed and don't have that experience of internships and the business experience, they tend to, when going into a corporate world, have a more difficult time than people that have had that exposure.
For recent grads, it's a little harder for us to gauge. I completely agree with you, the whole data side. But for anybody with any work experience, it's a little easier to gauge how much experience they've had with that and what their abilities are. So and for recent grads, we assume we'll have to train a fair amount of that if they're not coming with it. But I think some of the newer programs, I'll just term them like the analytics programs, that seems to be so core to those curricula that that seems to be a good place to go if you want that sort of right up.
And there's just an explosion of them now in degrees in data science and predictive analytics and call it what you will, that's coming out. I oftentimes ask people that I come across who say they're data scientists, what's their background, what's their training, what's their degree in, and it's a really wide range of things. I mean, computer science, OR, statistics, physics, psychology, right? I mean, all sorts of interesting things. And I think now those areas are kind of coming together under this unified banner of we want to use data and analytics to make decisions, right? And so that's kind of, I think, behind this emergence of data science. But I think that is one of the things that we really tried to do with, I was also involved in the Certified Analytics Professional Program, and is to, how do you test for that practical knowledge? Because that's the one thing that, we know if they have the degree, they know the theory, but it's that practical knowledge.
I think we're at 4:30, or just a couple minutes past. Do you want to, should we wrap? I think we should wrap,
Okay,
yeah.
we should wrap.
But let me invite you all to collar my panelists out at the reception or over the gala dinner or whatever. And for the moment, just please join me in thanking them.
Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Julia. And once again, we hope we can make this a tradition. Thank you, panelists.